Hello, and welcome back to Code Your English, the channel where we grow our vocabulary and grow our understanding of life at the very same time. Today we're talking about something every single one of us has experienced, no matter which country we come from or which language we speak natively. Have you ever been introduced to someone at a party, shaken their hand, repeated their name out loud, and then 30 seconds later realized you have absolutely no idea what they're called? Or maybe you've walked purposefully into your kitchen or your bedroom, full of intention, only to stand there completely blank, wondering what on earth you came in for. Perhaps you've read an entire page of a novel or a textbook, your eyes moving carefully across every single word, and then reached the bottom of the page with the unsettling realization that you cannot recall a single sentence of what you just read. These moments can be funny when we talk about them with friends, but they can also be a little frightening. They make us whisper to ourselves, "Is my memory getting worse? Is something wrong with me?" And it's not only about forgetting either. Sometimes it's the opposite problem. A memory that won't let go. A small, embarrassing moment from years ago that suddenly resurfaces at 3 in the morning, replaying itself in painful detail, while genuinely important information, like where you put your keys 5 minutes ago, refuses to stay put at all. It can feel almost unfair, as though your brain has decided to keep the wrong files and delete the right ones. And in a world that constantly tells us to train our brain, to buy this app or that supplement to boost our memory, it's easy to start believing that a good memory is simply something you either have or you don't, a kind of natural talent reserved for the lucky few. So here is the central question we're going to explore together in this episode. Is our memory actually failing us? Or have we simply never been taught how memory truly works? I want to be very clear about something before we go any further. This episode is not about turning you into a human encyclopedia. I'm not going to teach you tricks to memorize the order of a deck of 52 playing cards or recite thousands of digits of pi. That's a fun party trick, but it's not really what matters in daily life. Instead, what we're going to explore together is something far more useful and far more human. We're going to understand why certain memories disappear almost instantly, like footprints washed away by a wave, while other memories seem to stay with us forever, as vivid on our last day as they were on the day they happened. We're also going to talk about practical, science-backed ways to dramatically improve your memory, not by fighting against your brain, but by learning to work with it, the way a skilled sailor works with the wind instead of against it. Before we dive in, let me create a little bit of anticipation for you. Many of the popular beliefs we hold about memory are, quite surprisingly, completely wrong. We've been taught to think of our brain like a filing cabinet or a hard drive, a place where information gets neatly stored and then pulled out again, exactly as it was saved. As you're about to discover, that idea is almost entirely a myth. And once you understand what memory actually is, the way you learn English, the way you study, and even the way you understand your own past will begin to shift. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin decoding one of the most fascinating mysteries of the human mind. The biggest myth: memory isn't storage, it's reconstruction. Let's start by demolishing the biggest myth of all: the idea that memory works like a computer hard drive, quietly saving files that we can retrieve later in perfect condition. This metaphor feels intuitive, and it's the one most of us grew up with. But neuroscience tells a very different story. Your brain doesn't simply save an experience the way a phone saves a photo. Instead, every single time you remember something, your brain is actually rebuilding that memory from pieces, almost like an artist repainting a picture from memory rather than pulling out an original photograph. This process is called reconstruction, and it's one of the most important vocabulary words we'll use today. Reconstruction means putting something back together, piece by piece, rather than retrieving something whole and untouched. Here's the surprising and slightly unsettling part. Because memory is reconstructed rather than replayed, it changes a little bit every single time you recall it. Imagine a photograph that gets slightly redrawn by hand each time someone looks at it. Over the years, small details shift, colors fade or intensify, and sometimes entirely new elements sneak in that weren't part of the original scene at all. This is precisely why eyewitnesses to the same car accident or the same crime can give wildly different, yet equally confident accounts of what happened. Each person's memory was influenced by their perception in the moment, meaning the unique way their senses and mind interpreted the event, and then reshaped further through association, which is the mental linking of one idea, feeling, or image to another. Two people can witness the identical event and walk away with two genuinely different memories, not because one of them is lying, but because both of their brains reconstructed the experience differently. This also explains why our childhood memories can feel so vivid, so rich in color and emotion, and yet contain small inaccuracies we'd never suspect. You might remember your grandmother's kitchen as enormous and sunlit, filled with the smell of fresh bread. But if you visited that same house today as an adult, you might discover it was actually a small, ordinary room. Your brain didn't lie to you on purpose. It simply reconstructed the scene using interpretation, filling in gaps with emotional coloring and general cognitive patterns, which are the mental shortcuts and habitual ways of thinking that our brains rely on to make sense of the world efficiently. Emotions play an enormous role here, too. A memory tinged with love, fear, or nostalgia gets reshaped by that emotion every time it resurfaces, sometimes becoming more dramatic, sometimes softer, sometimes almost fictional in its details. So here's something worth sitting with for a moment, a genuine reflection I want you to carry with you as we continue. If memory is constantly being reconstructed, rather than perfectly preserved, how much of your own personal story, the narrative you tell yourself and others about who you are and where you've been, has quietly evolved over the years without your even noticing? It's a humbling thought, isn't it? Our past isn't a museum exhibit sitting untouched behind glass. It's more like a garden that we're unconsciously replanting every single time we walk through it. Why we forget. Forgetting is actually a superpower. Now let's challenge another deeply held misconception, one that causes so many of us unnecessary anxiety. The idea that forgetting is a flaw, a malfunction, a sign that something is broken inside our heads. In reality, forgetting is not a bug in the system. It is an intelligent, deliberate survival mechanism that your brain has developed over millions of years of evolution. Think about it this way. Every single second of every single day, your brain is bombarded with an overwhelming, almost unimaginable amount of sensory information. The temperature of the room, the sound of traffic outside, the texture of your shirt against your skin, the hundreds of faces you pass on the street, the countless emails, notifications, and conversations that flood your daily life. If your brain attempted to hold on to all of this information with equal importance, you would be paralyzed by information overload, buried under a mountain of useless data with no ability to function. This is where selective attention comes into play, a mental filtering process that allows your brain to prioritize what actually matters while letting the rest fade quietly into the background. Think of your mind as an editor working on a very long documentary film. Not every second of raw footage makes it into the final cut. The editor selects the meaningful moments and lets the rest end up on the cutting room floor. This filtering process is what we call cognitive efficiency, and it exists precisely because a brain that remembered everything with equal weight would actually be far less useful, not more. Consider how effortlessly you remember the layout of your childhood home, every hallway, every creak in the floorboard, every window, yet you cannot, for the life of you, remember where you parked your car yesterday afternoon at the grocery store. That's not a contradiction or a failure. That's your brain correctly recognizing that your childhood home held years of repeated, emotionally significant experience, while yesterday's parking spot was simply irrelevant noise, destined to be forgotten within hours. Similarly, think about how vividly you can recall an emotional conversation with a close friend. Every word, every pause, every facial expression, compared to how quickly you forget the contents of a routine work email you read last Tuesday. Your brain is constantly running a silent, automatic evaluation in the background, asking itself one simple but powerful question: will this information matter later? If the answer that comes back is probably not, your brain quietly, efficiently, and without any drama lets that information fade away like mist evaporating in the morning sun. This isn't laziness. It's wisdom built directly into your biology. So here's a reflection worth carrying with you throughout your day. What information are you feeding your brain every single hour? Through scrolling, through notifications, through half-attentive conversations, and honestly, how much of it truly deserves a permanent place in your memory? Perhaps forgetting isn't the enemy we've been taught to fear. Perhaps it's actually one of your brain's greatest and most underappreciated superpowers. Emotion, the hidden language of memory. Let's move now into one of the most beautiful aspects of how memory functions: the powerful, almost magical relationship between emotion and memory. Think honestly about your own life for a moment. Can you remember what you had for lunch 3 Tuesdays ago? Almost certainly not, and that's completely normal. Ordinary days blur together and disappear, precisely because they lacked anything emotionally distinctive. But now, think about your wedding day, or the moment of a serious accident, or the dizzying rush of first love, the aching pain of heartbreak, the pride of graduation day, or an unexpected act of kindness from a total stranger. These moments remain shockingly vivid, sometimes decades later, as if they happened only yesterday. Why does this happen? The answer lies in how emotion communicates directly with the brain's memory systems. Essentially, emotion sends your brain an urgent internal signal that says, "Pay attention, this matters." We can call this emotional significance, meaning the psychological weight or importance that a feeling attaches to an experience. When something emotionally significant happens, your brain releases dopamine, a neurochemical closely associated with reward, motivation, and heightened alertness. This flood of dopamine essentially stamps the experience with a kind of biological highlighter, making the brain treat that particular memory as a priority worth preserving in long-term memory, rather than letting it fade away like an ordinary, forgettable Tuesday. In other words, emotion acts like a spotlight, and whatever falls inside that spotlight tends to stick. This connection between emotion and memory explains something incredibly relevant to language learning, which happens to be exactly why we're here together on this podcast. Storytelling works dramatically better for learning than memorizing dry vocabulary lists, and now you understand precisely why. When you memorize an isolated list of 50 English words with their definitions, there is no emotional hook, nothing for your brain to attach significance to, and so those words tend to slip away within days. But when you hear those same words embedded inside an engaging story, a story with tension, humor, surprise, or heartbreak, your brain treats that vocabulary completely differently. The emotional context of the story acts like glue, binding the new words to something memorable and meaningful, which is precisely the philosophy behind this very podcast. We don't just want to give you word lists. We want to give you ideas, stories, and reflections that make the English language stick to your memory naturally, the same way an emotional experience sticks to your identity. Here's a reflection question worth pausing on. What memories from your own life still feel remarkably alive today, as if you could reach out and touch them? And what specific emotions are the ones keeping them so vivid? Understanding this connection between feeling and memory might just change the way you approach learning anything, including a new language. Attention is the real memory skill. Now, we arrive at what might be the single most practical insight of this entire episode, something that could genuinely transform how you learn from this day forward. So often, people walk around confidently declaring, "I just have a naturally bad memory," as though memory were a fixed trait, like eye color, something you're simply born with or without. But here's an uncomfortable truth worth sitting with. In the vast majority of cases, the real problem isn't a bad memory at all. It's that the person never actually paid attention to the information in the first place. You cannot forget something that your brain never properly registered to begin with. It's simply impossible. Think honestly about our modern world for a moment. We live surrounded by multitasking, the attempt to juggle multiple tasks simultaneously, constant digital distractions pulling our eyes toward screens every few minutes, an overwhelming notification culture that trains our brains to expect constant interruption, and the resulting divided attention, where our focus is split into thin, scattered slices rather than concentrated fully on one thing. Add to this the very real, very modern problem of mental fatigue, the exhaustion that comes from constantly switching between tasks and stimuli, and it becomes remarkably clear why so many of us walk away from conversations, meetings, and even books feeling like nothing actually stuck. There's a phrase I want you to remember, something worth writing down, or even saying out loud. What you fail to notice, you cannot remember. Read that again, slowly. It sounds simple, almost obvious, but its implications are profound. Memory doesn't actually begin with the act of remembering itself. Memory begins much earlier, at the moment of noticing. If you're scrolling through your phone while someone shares something deeply personal with you, Your brain may register a vague sound of a human voice, but it likely never encodes the actual content in any meaningful way, because your attention, your noticing, was somewhere else entirely. So here's a reflection worth genuinely considering, maybe even uncomfortably so. When was the last time you gave another person your complete, undivided attention, with your phone away, your mind fully present, not half listening while mentally composing your next response? If memory truly begins with attention, then perhaps the most powerful memory technique available to any of us isn't a clever trick or a fancy system at all. It's simply the old-fashioned, increasingly rare discipline of being fully present. Build stronger memories through meaning, not repetition. Now that we understand the underlying mechanics of memory, let's shift towards something wonderfully practical. Real techniques you can start using today, grounded not in gimmicks, but in genuine psychology. The instinct most of us have when we want to remember something is to repeat it over and over again, mechanically, mindlessly, hoping that sheer repetition will somehow force the information into our brains. And while repetition does play some role, it is, on its own, a remarkably weak and inefficient strategy. Instead, the far more powerful approach involves depth of processing rather than sheer frequency of exposure. Instead of simply repeating information endlessly like a parrot, try connecting it to something you already know or care about. Try questioning it, asking yourself why it's true, how it works, or what it reminds you of. Try visualizing it, creating a vivid mental picture in your mind rather than just hearing or reading words. Try teaching it to someone else, because the act of explaining something forces you to genuinely understand it rather than just recognize it. And try relating it back to your own personal experiences, weaving new information into the fabric of your existing memories rather than leaving it floating alone and disconnected. Let's put some proper vocabulary to these techniques, since after all, this is Code Your English. Association means deliberately linking new information to something you already know, creating a mental bridge between the unfamiliar and the familiar. Visualization means creating clear, vivid mental images to represent abstract information, since our brains are remarkably good at remembering pictures compared to plain facts. Chunking means breaking large amounts of information into smaller, more manageable groups. The same reason phone numbers are broken into small segments rather than written as one long, unbroken string of digits. Retrieval practice means actively testing yourself on information rather than simply rereading it passively, since the act of pulling a memory out of your brain actually strengthens it far more than passively reviewing notes ever could. Spaced repetition means reviewing information at gradually increasing intervals over time, rather than cramming everything into one single exhausting session. And finally, elaboration means adding extra detail, context, and personal meaning to a piece of information, making it richer and therefore more memorable. Think about how these techniques apply directly to real situations. When you're trying to remember someone's name at a party, don't just repeat it silently in your head. Associate it with something memorable, perhaps a person you already know with the same name, or a vivid image connected to that sound. When you're learning English vocabulary, don't just stare at flashcards. Visualize the word in action, chunk related words together into thematic groups, and elaborate by creating a sentence about your own actual life using that word. When you're preparing for a presentation, don't just read your notes over and over. practice actively retrieving the content from memory, testing yourself the way an athlete practices under real game conditions rather than just watching footage. And when you're studying for exams, spread your studying across days and weeks using spaced repetition, rather than exhausting yourself the night before in one desperate cramming session. Let's slow down for a moment and really sit inside one of these examples, because I think it's worth exploring in more depth. Imagine you're trying to learn the English word resilient. A shallow approach would simply have you repeating the word and its dictionary definition over and over, perhaps 20 times, hoping it eventually sticks through sheer force of exposure. But a deep processing approach looks completely different. You might first ask yourself questions about the word. Where does it come from? What does it literally suggest about bouncing back from difficulty? How is it different from a similar word like strong? Then you might visualize it, picturing a tree bending dramatically in a violent storm without snapping, springing back upright once the wind dies down. Then you might elaborate by writing your own sentence, using the word to describe a real moment in your own life, perhaps a time you felt resilient after a setback at work or in your studies. By the time you've done all of this, you haven't just repeated a word. You've built an entire small network of meaning around it. And that network is precisely what makes the word nearly impossible to forget. The central lesson here is beautifully simple. The deeper the processing, the stronger the memory. Shallow repetition creates fragile, temporary memories, while deep, meaningful engagement creates memories that last for years. So here's a reflection worth genuinely considering as you go about your studies and your life. What if learning became less about the anxious, mechanical act of memorizing and more about the joyful, curious act of truly understanding? Lifestyle. Your brain remembers what your body supports. Let's now expand our view beyond study techniques and mental strategies, because memory doesn't exist in some isolated, abstract corner of your brain, disconnected from the rest of your body. Your memory is deeply, intimately tied to your overall physical and emotional well-being. Specifically, memory depends heavily on sleep, quality exercise, proper nutrition, effective stress management, and general emotional well-being. Neglect any one of these pillars for long enough, and you'll notice your memory quietly beginning to falter, no matter how many clever techniques you've learned. Let's talk about sleep first, because I think this one surprises people the most. Many of us think of sleep as a passive state, essentially just turning off for several hours until morning arrives. But sleep is anything but passive when it comes to memory. During sleep, your brain is remarkably busy performing a process called consolidation, which means organizing, strengthening, and filing away the experiences and information you absorbed during the day, essentially transferring memories from a fragile, temporary state into a more permanent, stable form. This is precisely why students who pull an all-night cramming session before an exam often perform worse than those who studied less. Overall but slept properly, because without adequate sleep, the information gathered during the day never gets properly consolidated into lasting memory. Stress, unfortunately, works directly against this entire process. Chronic, prolonged stress floods your body with hormones that actively interfere with the brain regions responsible for forming new memories, making it harder to both learn new information and retrieve information you already know. On the other hand, physical movement and exercise have been shown to dramatically improve cognitive performance, partly by increasing blood flow to the brain, and partly by promoting something called neuroplasticity, which refers to your brain's remarkable, lifelong ability to form new neural connections and adapt in response to new experiences and learning. This means your brain is never fixed or finished. It remains flexible and moldable well into old age, provided you give it the right conditions to thrive. Building emotional resilience, the capacity to recover well from difficulty and stress, along with genuine restoration, meaning deliberate periods of rest and recovery, forms the foundation of long-term cognitive health, the overall wellness and functioning of your mind over the course of your entire life. So here's a reflection worth taking seriously, perhaps even uncomfortably so. If your brain truly is your most valuable asset, the single tool responsible for every thought, every relationship, every skill, and every memory you'll ever hold, how well are you actually taking care of it on a daily basis? Are you sleeping enough? Moving your body? Managing your stress? Or are you expecting peak mental performance from a brain you're quietly neglecting? Becoming someone who never stops learning. Let's shift now from specific techniques and habits toward something deeper and more personal: identity itself. If you observe people who seem to possess remarkably excellent memories, people who effortlessly recall names, facts, stories, and details that others quickly forget, you will often discover they share one particular characteristic in common. And it's probably not what you'd expect. It's not raw intelligence. It's not some special genetic gift. It's curiosity. Here's why curiosity matters so profoundly when it comes to memory. A genuinely curious mind naturally remembers more information, and the reason lies in a beautiful chain reaction we've actually already discussed throughout this episode. Curiosity creates attention, because when you're genuinely curious about something, you naturally lean in, focus intently, and notice details you'd otherwise overlook entirely. Attention, as we explored earlier, creates meaning, because focused attention allows information to be properly processed and connected to existing knowledge, rather than sliding past unnoticed. And meaning, in turn, creates memory, because meaningful information gets prioritized by your brain for long-term storage, rather than being filtered out and forgotten. Curiosity, attention, meaning, memory. This is the beautiful chain reaction that transforms an ordinary mind into an extraordinary one. This brings us to the powerful concept of lifelong learning, the ongoing commitment to continuously acquiring new knowledge and skills throughout your entire life, rather than assuming your education ends the day you finish school or university. Closely related is the idea of a growth mindset, the belief that your abilities and intelligence can be developed and improved through effort and practice, rather than remaining fixed traits you were simply born with. People who embrace both lifelong learning and a growth mindset tend to approach the world by constantly asking questions and genuinely seeking understanding, rather than simply collecting isolated facts to display or prove their intelligence to others. So here's a reflection worth carrying with you long after this episode ends. Do you tend to approach each day like someone desperately trying to prove what they already know, defending your existing beliefs and knowledge like a fortress? Or do you approach each day like someone genuinely excited to discover what they don't yet know, treating your own ignorance not as a source of shame, but as an open door leading toward growth? The people with truly remarkable memories aren't necessarily smarter than everyone else. They've simply remained endlessly, joyfully curious. Don't try to remember everything. Learn to remember what matters. As we bring this episode to a close, let's take a moment to recap everything we've explored together today. Memory, as we've discovered, is not some rare gift handed out only to a lucky few. It is a skill, one that can be deliberately shaped and strengthened through attention, through emotion, through thoughtful repetition, through genuine meaning, through relentless curiosity, and through consistent healthy habits that support your body and your brain together as one interconnected system. I want to leave you with a genuine challenge to carry forward into your daily life. Perhaps the goal was never truly about remembering absolutely everything. In fact, as we discovered earlier, forgetting itself is a form of intelligence, a quiet superpower protecting you from being overwhelmed by an impossible flood of information. Perhaps the real goal, the deeper and more meaningful goal, is becoming the kind of person who notices more deeply, who listens more carefully, and who lives more intentionally, moment by moment, conversation by conversation. Let me leave you with 3 reflective questions to sit with over the coming days. What deserves a permanent place in your memory? Something worth deliberately protecting and nurturing rather than letting it slip away unnoticed? Which moments are quietly passing you by right now, completely unnoticed, simply because your attention has wandered somewhere else, perhaps toward a screen, perhaps toward worry, perhaps toward nowhere in particular? And finally, if you truly remembered what matters most in your life, held it close, revisited it often, and let it shape your choices, how differently might you actually choose to live? Thank you so much for spending this time with me today, learning English while exploring the genuinely fascinating inner workings of the human mind. Before you go, I'd like to ask you for one small favor. Try to carry just one new idea from today's episode into your daily life this week. Whether that's giving someone your full, undivided attention, connecting new vocabulary to a vivid story, or simply protecting your sleep a little more fiercely than before. If this episode gave you something valuable, please consider sharing it with someone in your life who enjoys thoughtful conversations like this one, and come back for our next episode as we continue strengthening both your English and your understanding of yourself, one idea at a time. Remember this: every meaningful conversation, every new word you learn, and every moment of genuine curiosity isn't just improving your language skills quietly in the background. It is actively shaping the way your mind learns, grows, and remembers for the rest of your life. Until next time, this has been Code Your English. Keep listening, keep questioning, and keep learning.